Welcome everyone to our Packers News pre-draft live stream virtually alongside Tom Silverstein. I am Olivia Reiner. Tomorrow begins the 2020 NFL Draft. We're finally here, everyone. Today we are going to be taking a pretty broad overview to look at all 3 days of the draft. Before we get into that, I want to remind you that you can be a part of our conversation as always. Go down into the Facebook comments, leave us a question, leave us a thought that you're having, perhaps a draft desire that you have, and we will get to that toward the end of our show. Tom, let's take a look at all 10 picks that the Packers have in the draft this year. What stands out to me, first of all, is that the Packers have 10 picks. 5 of those picks are in the first 5 rounds. The other 5 are in the last 2 rounds of the draft. General Manager Brian Gutekunst spoke to the media yesterday, and he made it pretty clear that he's willing to move around into areas that he thinks are going to be strong in the draft. Now, which areas those are, that remains to be seen. We'll find out over the next couple of days. How likely is it that the Packers stay at number 30 in the first round?
I think they're going to try to move around. I think that there's going to be a lot of movement in the first round. I think there'll be some teams who are kind of chasing players. There's a lot of players who are sort of borderline great or borderline good, and you can interpret them in different ways. And I think each team will interpret them differently. And so I think there will be some teams moving around a little bit, trying to find the sweet spot for where they can get the guy they want, or where they can get in a position where 2 or 3 guys that they have rated equally are sitting there at that spot. I think Gutekunst will chase a spot up in front of him in the hopes of, I think, landing an inside linebacker is my guess. But he might also see a tackle. There's a certain level where the first round tackles cut off, and it's very possible that he could get frozen out of those guys too, and so he might not need to move up there. But it could be a chase. I said in my prediction that it could be a chase with Baltimore, who picks 28th, to try to get one of the 2 inside linebackers, Patrick Queen or Kenneth Murray.
Inside linebacker, offensive tackle, 2 positions you just mentioned there, Tom, that may or may not be there at number 30. Who would be worth it for the Packers to move up in the draft?
I think those 2 inside linebackers, I kind of like Kenneth Murray from Oklahoma more. I think there's some debate as to how valuable that is, but I think the Packers have desperate need there. I think they can't ignore it. There's a couple guys you can get in the second or third round, but I think you want to save those rounds for wide receivers. I think the best thing you can do is take advantage of the top line players, because there's a big drop off after those inside linebackers. The drop off from the wide receiver he would pick at 30 to the wide receiver he would pick in the second round isn't as great. So, sometimes you've got to hit the sweet spot of that position. And so I could see him chasing that a little bit.
Who would have to come off the board in order for the Packers to consider moving back out of that number 30 spot in the draft?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that there's a single player that would happen, but I think a certain combination where where they're thinking, okay, there's 2 guys, maybe 3 that we really like. We think one of them's going to land to us at 30, and then they're watching the draft go down, and then all of a sudden it's down to 2 guys, and then it's down to 1 guy, and then all of a sudden their top 3 guys are gone, and they look at their board and they say, well, geez, the next 6 guys we have are all rated the same. Let's see if we can move down. I think that's the scenario when you move down. I'm not sure that it's one particular player. But you sort of read how the runs are going. Are all the offensive tackles going and gone? Are all the first round offensive tackles gone? Are the inside linebackers gone? Is there maybe there's one wide receiver you really like above everyone else, and he's gone? So there's a lot of things that go into it, and then you have to find a trading partner. There's no guarantee that you're going to find a trading partner. There's other people who want to move back too.
Tom, you've mentioned a few of the needs already that the Packers have coming into this draft, including inside linebacker, offensive tackle, wide receiver. Funny enough, those are all positions that the Packers did address in free agency. However, there are still needs at those positions. Right tackle Rick Wagner turns 31 in October. He's on a 2-year deal. He is not the guaranteed long-term starter at right tackle for the Packers. Certainly, he's a competitor at that position. However, he's not the guaranteed starter. Inside linebacker Christian Kirksey is the likely starter. However, who will be the second inside linebacker starter alongside him? Wide receiver Devin Funchess is certainly going to be able to compete for a spot on the roster this upcoming training camp. However, he is not the answer to all of the Packers' playmaking woes that they have. With that all in mind, how should the Packers operate at number 30 if they decide to stay there? Should they target positional needs like any of those 3 positions or others that we've already mentioned? Or should they go after the best player available?
Well, I maintain they're desperate at inside linebacker. I really believe that. I don't think they can say to themselves, Christian Kirksey's going to be healthy for this season, and that's a guarantee, especially since he's played 5 games in the last 2 years. So there's some question mark there. You might like Ty Summers from last year, but he's very inexperienced, and it's hard to imagine him being a starter. I think there's a whiff of desperation there. You may be able to get like a Blake Martinez in the type player in the 4th round or 3rd round. It'll take some time to develop that guy. If, let's say, Kirksey's gets hurt and Oren Burks doesn't come through again, all of a sudden you're stuck with this guy who's maybe not ready to play. I just feel like you can't go into the season the way they are right now at that position.
Tom, it sounds like you're pretty emphatic that the Packers are going to take an inside linebacker with their first pick, whenever that is.
They have to get there. They have to get in a position to take one.
Sure.
I don't think there'll be one there. I think they could move back and they could get the next tier of inside linebacker early in the 2nd round. But there's only 2 guys who are 1st round grades, and that's Patrick Queen and Kenneth Murray.
I don't want you to give away your pick just yet, because those will be up on PackersNews.com very soon, and in print as well. If you are a print subscriber, we'll have all of our projections for the 1st round, our 1st round pick for the Packers over there. So make sure you check those out. Let's take a look at day 2 for the Packers. Moving on, 2 picks: 2nd round, 62nd overall; 3rd round, 94th overall. Tom, let's focus in on the receivers. Brian Gutekunst has touted the depth of the receiver position at the Combine. There are certainly receivers likely to go in round 1. Quite a few of them will come off the board if the Packers are looking toward day 2 as a day where they should be targeting receivers. Round 1, possibly LSU wide receiver Justin Jefferson could come off the board. However, there are going to be plenty of talented receivers left on day 2. Possibly Baylor wide receiver Denzel Mims, USC wide receiver Michael Pittman Jr. Who knows if they will be there? We'll certainly find out. How likely is it that the Packers will zero in on a receiver on day 2?
Well, I sort of feel like they should come out with 2 wide receivers out of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th rounds. I think those are where most scouts are saying they're serviceable to starting type players all the way through the 3rd round and into the 4th round. So I don't think you want to wait to the 5th. I think you've got to address it by the second or third round. By the day number 2, you better have at least one wide receiver. So I think we will see that happen. If not, the first pick. Who knows?
At least one wide receiver, you said, on day 2. However, that's one other position that could be drafted on day 2 for the Packers. Which other positions should be in play on day 2 with either the second or third pick of the day?
Well, my feeling is that they need to pick offensive guys, and they need to pick guys who can produce yards. They do need a tackle, but I still think they can work on that. They have a little bit of leeway with Wagner, and then possibly Turner could bump out there if they absolutely had to. I think you need guys who can get yards. I think whether that's a running back, whether that's a wide receiver, whether that's a tight end, you need someone who can produce, and they don't have enough of those guys. To me, if Jonathan Taylor were there in the first round, personally, I would take him. If he's there in the second round, I would definitely take him. If DeAndre Swift, for some reason, he won't, but fell to the second round, I take him. I think you can't. You have to take the best, most impactful offensive player you can, and I don't think you want to just because you have a need at wide receiver, pass up someone who could be a 1,500-yard rusher later on, or could team with Aaron Jones, and you'd have one of the most dynamic backfields. So I think you gotta hit where hitting the best possible offensive players.
I'm sure many Packers fans would be happy to hear that, Tom. The Packers went for some more offensive playmakers to boost this offense. Let's pull up this next graphic here to take a look at what's to come on day 3 if everything stays the way it does. So that's a lot of picks. 7 picks on day 3, rounds 4 through 7. As I mentioned at the top of the show, 5 picks in the last 2 rounds of the draft. A whole lot of picks. Day 3 picks in years past include running back Aaron Jones, left tackle David Bakhtiari. Certainly some gems can be found later in the draft. Tom, regardless of position, what types of athletes will the Packers look for from a day 3 player?
Well, I think day 3, I think you can start looking for return guys with great speed and elusiveness who maybe aren't that great at their positions, but have tremendous return ability. There's several guys like that. There's a couple of running backs like that. There's wide receivers like that. I personally like Antonio Gibson from Memphis. I think he's a really explosive guy who doesn't really have a position. He's sort of one of these gadget guys that I think could be very productive in LaFleur's offense. I think Joe Reed from Virginia is another guy like that. Wide receiver who could be a running back. There's various guys like that who I think you're trying to strike and hit a guy who fits something that you need or fits some area where he is. Maybe it's just one area instead of being a complete player. He has a special ability in one area. Maybe he's a special teams player, something like that. That's what you're trying to hit in those late rounds. I view the 6th and 7th rounds. I would say their last 6th round pick and their 3 7th round picks are basically their undrafted free agents. That's when undrafted free agency starts for them. They have all these picks. They get their choice instead of having to recruit these guys and fight other teams. They can start filling positions with those, and that's where that's where you start to build your depth and you pick for need a little bit more. I would say the 2 first the first two sixth-round picks, you're still in the mode of, hey, we might be able to get a player there.
Tom, you've mentioned a couple of receivers like Gibson and Reed. What other positions might be at play for the Packers on day 3?
They have to get a tackle somewhere. I just think you have to always get a tackle, or at least someone who has a potential to play tackle. A lot of their tackles have later moved into guard, but I think you need to find someone like that. I think you have to consider a quarterback somewhere in there. Now, that might be the guy in the 6th round, but what if Jalen Hurts is sitting there at their 3rd round pick? For some reason, everybody gives up on him, and he's sitting there, and you like him a lot. Maybe you got to take him. Maybe that value is just too great, and you take him. Jacob Eason, maybe he drops really far, or the kid from Ashwaubenon, James Franklin, he's there. At some point, I think you will see them take a quarterback, but I think you got to come out of this with at least one receiver, at least one tackle, and probably maybe 2 receivers. 2 receivers, a tackle, and maybe a tight end. And an inside linebacker. Sorry, you got to have an inside linebacker.
Lots of items on the wish list.
There are, aren't there?
Well, for the Packers, Tom's crafting the wish list as if he were GM. I appreciate that, Tom. Let's head over to Facebook now to take some of your questions. Why don't we continue on the quarterbacks conversation, Tom? I'll go with Mike here. Mike says rumors, I don't know where these rumors are coming from, but rumors suggest that Oregon quarterback Justin Herbert drops to the end of the 1st round of the draft. I'm not even going to ask. Well, you're kind of asking, Mike, because we're now bringing it up. But what if Herbert were there at 30 and the Packers like him enough, should they consider him in the 1st round?
Sure. Why not? Yeah. I mean, I don't think he's dropping down that far. I don't think that's going to happen. But I would guess that there's a lot of people who have, probably mid-round grades on him, mid-first. And if you could get him at the end of the 1st round, sure. I think I would rather try to get, if he's there, I would try to get someone looking to trade up into that spot who's desperate for a quarterback and try to work that. But if that trade didn't come through and I thought he was better than anybody else on the board, then sure, I would do that.
It's an interesting question. It's interesting considering the fact that Aaron Rodgers has made it very clear that he is not retiring anytime soon, that he wants to continue playing. However, at this point in Brett Favre's career is when Aaron Rodgers was drafted. With that in mind, how do you balance having a franchise quarterback still in the organization with the intent to continue playing for several years with the fact that perhaps it is time, as shown in the past, to draft the next quarterback?
Well, I think you're using it as competition for your backup position. I think you're bringing a guy in to compete with Tim Boyle and give you possibly a really good option as a backup. Aaron Rodgers has gotten hurt over the years, and there's no guarantee he'll get through the season. And you've got to develop a decent backup. What if you have a really good team and you're on your way to the NFC Championship again, or you feel like you can get there, and then your quarterback gets hurt and you've got nothing? I think that's another reason why if there's a really good quarterback there, you take him. You just can't predict what's going to happen with that position.
It's a good thought, Mike. Thank you. Even though you technically did not ask a question, we took your question anyway, so we appreciate that. We'll flip it over to Brian here. Brian asks, which receiver is the most LaFleur ready in this draft? Interesting question, Brian, especially seeing as nobody knows what exactly the offseason program is going to look like, what training camp is going to look like, whether or not there's going to be a season. Before we even get into that, let's just think about exactly what this offseason is going to look like for the rookies. The Packers in this draft would like to have rookies that are able to make an immediate impact and get right in there without not a whole lot of offseason preparation, as far as we know now. Who of the receivers, if the Packers were able to get one that they really like early on, who would be ready to participate right off the bat, especially in Matt LaFleur's offense?
Well, if I had my choice of anybody, I would take Jerry Jeudy because I think he's the best route runner. From what I've watched and from what people have told me, he's just beautiful in the way he runs his routes. He's fast. He's tough. He would be a candidate to compete immediately. I think Justin Jefferson I think he can fit in anywhere. I think that guy's just a good football player, smart guy who runs really good routes. He's not a burner like Jeudy, but he's going to get open. He's a guy you could trust right away to play. CD Lamb's probably like that as well. Now you get into the next group and you talk about Denzel Mims, and he's coming from Baylor with a different kind of a spread offense. I'm not convinced he's going to be able to help me right away. I feel like he's a great athlete, but you're banking on him probably more for the future. The kid from USC, and God, all these names are just floating through my head, so I'm forgetting his name. Pittman. I really like that guy. I think he's Alan Lazard on steroids. He's really good route runner. He's a guy who would fit in. The question is, he'd fit in, but what's his ceiling? How high, how much more does he have to grow? And he's probably one of those guys that doesn't have as high a ceiling as Denzel Mims does, but he's ready to play right now. Jalen Reagor might be able to help you, especially with some of the gadget stuff. Playing in the slot is not an easy position, and he's sort of a slot guy. It's not an easy position in the NFL, and they would probably want him to do a lot of different things. I think he could do it, but you never really know until you get guys. I'm trying to think of anybody else who might be around in the first. Those are kind of the top candidates that right off the top of my head, that I think could help them or not.
And truthfully, the Packers need receivers that can be playmakers immediately this season. So we'll see exactly what they decide to do, how they decide to address wide receiver in this year's draft. Thank you, Brian, for your question. Let's move on to Blake. We've talked a lot about what the Packers should do in the draft. However, we haven't talked about what they shouldn't do, who they shouldn't address. We've argued that they should go after the most obvious: wide receiver, offensive tackle, inside linebacker. We've even thrown in quarterback, running back. However, which positions should the Packers avoid? Are they set on in this year's draft?
Well, so I'm of the feeling that you should always draft a cornerback somewhere. You just can never have enough cornerbacks, and that competition is good. So I think you should draft a cornerback. I think you could get away with not drafting a safety. I think you have enough there. The problem with that is safeties are typically really good special teams players. So you probably do end up drafting a safety. Maybe either draft him or sign one as an undrafted free agent. I guess I wouldn't feel it necessary to draft an edge rusher. You have a good number of those. But then again, you can't have too many of those. One injury and all of a sudden you're down. So I'm not sure there's a position on the team that they couldn't improve. I really do. I don't think there's a position when they're stocked. Running back, you can say that their cupboard's full, but they got to think about the future too, with both those guys being free agents. defensive line, you could get away with not doing it, but I would never turn down a good defensive lineman, even if I had the best defensive line in the NFL. If there's another one I could add, I would do that.
Even though the Packers struggled with their run defense this past season, you don't think that this is the draft to address the defensive line?
I don't think there's anyone there in the first round that they're going to be able. Well, there may be Blaylock from or Blacklock from TCU is a guy that might be available, but he's got some question marks. I don't think so. It would have to be someone would have to drop. And I don't think that's the strength of this draft. I think it's, we've talked about it. The strength is wide receivers. There's some depth at offensive tackle. There's some running backs. And I think you got to hit on the strength of these drafts.
Blake, thank you for your question. Tom, we haven't spoken about tight end, and there is a need there, certainly. The Packers they're bringing back tight end Mercedes Lewis on a one-year deal. They have tight ends Robert Tonyan and Evan Bayless at the position. They also have James Looney, who is now a converted tight end. However, that's it. That's the length of the list. Tight end Jimmy Graham left for Chicago. The Packers decided not to keep him around on the last year of his deal. Matt asks, would the Packers be willing to make a move for Tampa Bay Buccaneers tight end O.J. Howard? Rob Gronkowski announced his return to football yesterday after he decided to sign with the Buccaneers following his former quarterback Tom Brady down to Florida. What about O.J. Howard? How likely is it that the Bucs would even be willing to let him walk and make a deal with the Packers?
They might. They have another tight end that they like a lot. They might be willing to get rid of him, especially if, of course, with Gronkowski coming in, I think there's a strong possibility that they could trade him. They may have to cut him. I don't know. I wouldn't trade a second-round pick for him. I mean, no, not in a million years. But you might be able to get away with a fourth, something like that. Most teams know that, now that they have Gronkowski, it's going to be a little bit of a tight position there. So you kind of wait and see and wait it out and try to get the best deal you could. But I wouldn't give up the farm. I still think they can get a tight end in the draft, or I think there's going to be teams who draft tight ends and get rid of somebody.
A whole lot of interesting stuff going down on there in Tampa Bay. The Packers are supposed to play them this season, considering if the season actually happens. Hopefully it does. So that'll be a fun game to look forward to for all you Packers fans out there. All right, I think that's going to wrap it up for us today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. The next few days for everyone are going to be very crazy, and Packers News will have you covered all throughout it. Tom, you're doing your live blog. The live blog is back.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It's going to be a blast. Everybody should be there and get your IV coffee drip going, and I'll be ready.
I can't wait. I will be there too, for sure.
Good.
Can't miss the live blog. After every day, everyone, we will be live once again over on Facebook and on YouTube as per usual to break down all the picks of the day, to preview the upcoming day, for you to ask us questions, all that good stuff. So make sure you come back for the draft. Again, everyone, thank you so much. Please stay safe, stay healthy, and we will see you next time. Have a good one.